It is so choice. If you have the means, I highly recommend picking one up.
What's up guys? Now in case you missed the original unboxing video, I'm just going to go ahead and give you a quick recap. Well, this is going to be a little different though. The original video featured an altitude 16, this one is the altitude 32. There are some differences which I'll point out as we go. Up front is the volume dial, mute, and power buttons, and the Trinnov logo is engraved into the thick aluminum faceplate. Slightly off center is the display with direct source selection inputs on the bottom. On the right is the selection dial and buttons for back, select, and menu, and there's also a 1/4-inch headphone jack on the lower corner. Around back you have 7 HDMI 2.0 inputs and 2 outputs. At the time of this video, HDMI 2.1 isn't supported, but I'm told there is an upgrade path for when 2.1 becomes more needed. Now where this differs from the altitude 16 is that is capped at 16 channels. On the 32 you'll find 4 sets of DB25 connectors that can output 32 channels, so if you're going to go beyond the standard 16 XLR outs, you will need a DB25 connector for the additional channels. If you want to go beyond 32 channels, there is an external processor that you can add that can take this to 48 channels. Another difference between the altitude 16 and 32 is that DAC resolution is 24-bit 192K on the 32, whereas the 16 is 2496. Also around back you'll find AES ins and outs, optical and coax outputs and inputs, and unbalanced RCA outputs for 16 channels. If the back panel looks a little familiar like a computer, that's because it's basically a Linux PC with a Core i7 inside. The altitude 16 has a Core i3 inside, so this one's got a bit more horsepower. And to keep in mind, since this is basically a computer, adding new features or sound formats is as simple as adding a new peripheral or downloading a new firmware. This is one of the most future-proof processors you can get, and in case you didn't know, this did come out in 2015. For setup, this is going to be paired up with a couple Macintosh amps powering 11 Bowers & Wilkins CT 7.4 speakers. I've got a few different subwoofers hooked up right now for review. 2 Martin Logan Balance Force 212s, a REL 1205 under the center channel, and 2 SVS PV16s are in the back row. The Altitude can calibrate each subwoofer individually. For demos, I'll be using a Kaleidoscape, an Apple TV, and a Zapiti media player. Now before we get into the demos, if you're new to the channel and love all this home theater stuff, think about tapping that subscribe button for new weekly videos. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is go and run the room correction. So this is very much like you would get on an Odyssey receiver or Dirac Live. This is the very user-friendly Trinnov optimizer. So let's say we're going to start a new configuration, or we're going to continue on an existing configuration. Let's say we're going to go existing, which is the one that we have right now, which is already set up for us. Here on the right side, you can see that it does give you some tips and tricks on what these specific settings do. We're going to close that. And you can see I continued off my previous setup here. So this is already set up for me. So we're going to go ahead and click on next. Now this is your base management screen. So right now we are in the quick setup. We're actually going to turn that on. So by default it looks like it's off. We're going to turn that on. This is the quick setup mode. Let's say everything you wanted to start at like 80 Hertz. You would input 80 Hertz there, or maybe 70 Hertz. Click that. So we'll make that 70 Hertz. You can select the type of filter that you want to apply to this. So you can change your slopes. So you want all the speakers to be crossed at 70 Hertz. Click select all. And since I have subwoofers, 5 subwoofers, we'd select all. Click apply. So now everything under 70 Hertz would go over to the subwoofers, to all 5 subs. And before you get this started, straight out of the box, the default is going to be V8 for your calibration for the altitude. Within the box there is a USB stick, which is going to have the calibration file for your unit. So every time you do this, make sure you always check that you have the correct one. So don't choose V8 or whatever came by default on your unit. Make sure you select the correct cal file. So you're going to plug in the microphone in the back. You're going to click next. You're going to want to position the microphone in the center in the money seat in your main listening position. There's a red light on the front of the microphone that you want it to be pointing dead center at the screen. You want to be sure that the microphone is level as well, because if you notice that there are 4 capsules on this microphone, so it measures space in 3D. So if you have it tilted in one way or the other, your measurement's going to be off. So you want to make sure that the microphone is perfectly level. It's measuring the 3D space, so it can perfectly find where each one of your speakers are in your room, which is very important for the 3D remapping feature. So once you get that perfectly aligned, you're going to go ahead and click Next. Be sure you plug in the mic, turn on the power button, click Next again. Alright, so the screen here is where we're going to be setting up our calibration level. So you're going to want to get it till it indicates 80 dB. So we're going to go ahead and click Start. Right now we are at 59, so we're going to go all the way up to 80. Alright, so once we hit 80, we're going to go ahead and click on Next. Then we're going to go ahead and click Calibrate. You can also add more measurement points here as well. So if you want to add a bunch of these, you can add measurement point 1. Measurement 1 is always going to be like your main seat. Then you could do like different seats within your room or different parts of the room here. You would just keep adding measurements here. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and click on Calibrate. Now the measurements could take some time depending on the number of speakers you have. Once that's all done, you're going to be taken to the weighting page. Since I have 3 seats, I'm going to allocate 80% of the correction to the main listening position for the best sound. Since it's normally just me in here by myself, the other seats will just get 10% each. You of course can adjust this to however you want. I should also mention that I manually EQ'd my subs using REW beforehand, since I have a nasty null in my main seat. The altitude alone couldn't fix it by itself. This of course could be different depending on your room. Now if you want to check out the rest of the settings, you can find that in a separate video. I'll link it at the end of this one. The first demo I popped in was the Auro 3D demo. Now this is a 13.1 channel demo, which has 2 additional speakers that I don't. A center height channel and the voice of God channel. Now there's no way you're going to be able to hear this over a YouTube video, but if you turn on 3D remapping, once the channel call out happens for center height, the altitude will take the nearest channels available and try to recreate that center height speaker by producing a phantom image. And let me tell you, it works pretty well. It even worked for the voice of God speaker. Of course, if you're sitting off center, then it doesn't really sound all that convincing. But the 3D remapping is a really cool feature. If there's supposed to be a sound at a specific spot and you don't have a speaker for it there, or it's a little out of place, the altitude does an awesome job of making it sound like you've got a speaker in that spot. This is also a very useful feature if you have placement issues and you just can't have your speaker at the ideal locations. Another movie I enjoy is Underwater on iTunes. I know, it's a digital 4K stream, but it's got knockout video quality and a killer 7-channel mix that's extremely bass heavy with some subtle nuances thrown in. I wanted to see how well the upmixing worked with 3D remapping. Having such a bombastic mix, I didn't hear any gaps in bass when my speakers would punch and the subwoofers would kick in. It also doesn't hurt that I've got 5 subwoofers hooked up either. Cycling through DTS, Auro, and Dolby upmixing, I found Auro sounded the most artificial by just extending the side surrounds up to the top, whereas Neural X lowered bass output and didn't always have a convincing overhead effect. I thought Dolby was the most natural, keeping the bass heavy and also producing those little droplets of water that sometimes fell from the top speakers. There were also times where you could hear the creatures pounding above your head.
Is that a baby? Should we close that door?
While 3 gave an enveloping experience, though Dolby, to my ears, sounded the most realistic and sound placement was very natural. To wrap up my demo listening, I wanted to hear the kind of spacing this thing could deliver. Putting in A Quiet Place was a real atmospheric treat. This movie is in Dolby Atmos and it has one of the more realistic sound mixes that I've heard. There are some big action moments, but it's the subtle effects that the altitude pulls from the mix that places you in a virtual outdoor environment, audibly. The soundstage created by the altitude is large and open and really captures the visuals that you're seeing on screen. If a scene takes place outside, you'll hear those environmental sounds in every direction and in places you don't have any speakers. If something took place indoors where it's nothing but characters breathing or just silence, having a processor with a silent noise floor becomes very important. You don't want to hear any hissing or unwanted noise coming from your speakers drawing attention to itself, and the altitude is dead quiet. There's a few different versions of the Altitude. There's the Altitude 16, which is locked at 16 channels for $18,000, and there's the upgradable Altitude 32 16-channel model for $28,450. The 24-channel version is $34,450, and the full 32-channel version is $38,450. These are the prices with all codecs included at the time of this video. The only sound format that's missing is Imax Enhanced, but it should be arriving soon. I get it, it's a ton of spare change. There's no way around it. Neither of these models are for a budget-minded person. If you're a real hardcore enthusiast or don't have to worry about your next bill, then this could very well be for you. If you think about it as a value proposition, the Altitude 32 came out in 2015. We're now in 2021. It's now 6 years old, but yet it's still considered the Everest of home theater processors by many. If you originally bought it in 2015, that comes down to around $6,000 or less a year. That's cheaper than many flagship processors from other brands. And if you're like me, while working and saving and trying to get the latest and greatest, you're probably buying a new processor every year. It's one of those buy once, cry once situations. I should also mention that it came with a 5-year warranty back then, which means it's expired now or close to it. But recently Trinnov did extend the warranty period for another 5 years. So that should give the original buyers even more peace of mind knowing the product is going to be supported for even longer. How many surround sound processors can you name that's even better than when you first got it and is still top class? If you already own an Altitude Pre-Pro or if you're interested in getting one, then you know or have heard that these offer a superb audio experience. To say it blows away any receiver or processor out there is kind of an understatement. It truly can elevate your home theater to levels you probably didn't think was possible and can do so in many different ways. It's an upgradable piece of audio equipment and can grow as your system grows, and that's a very rare thing in the AV world. If there was some glaring issues that I had with the Altitude 16 or 32, besides the price, I can honestly say nothing major comes to mind. Although I have occasionally heard the rare sound drop out once in a while, but as I said, it's kind of a rare thing. I mean, I could also say that some of those settings are a bit over my head and it's really complicated, but that's more on me rather than the Altitude. So it's great that you have that flexibility if you can fully harness the power. It's been a rock solid functioning unit in my day-to-day usage, and if you couldn't tell, it's the best thing I have in my audio rack. So those are just my thoughts on the Trinnov Altitude processors. What do you guys think of these Pre-Pros? Have you heard one, and how do you think they stack up to the competition? Leave a comment and let us know. Now if you want to grab a Trinnov Altitude or anything that I've mentioned in this video, then visit valueelectronics.com or give them a call. Just let them know that we sent you. As always guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you found this video helpful, and we'll see you guys again in the next one.